All right, well, welcome to the Speed Traveler Road Show. I'm Chris Evertsen, that's Charlie Frank, and if you're listening to us live, it's on KHTS AM 1220 FM 98.1. Of course, we're available wherever you download your favorite podcasts. And before we even get started, if you like what we do, if you've seen everything we've done before, hit that follow button, download our videos. And Charlie, we've got a fun show today. And before we even get into the show, we should talk a little bit about what we do, because people ask us what we do on a regular basis, and we never really answer that question until the end of the show when everyone's already tuned out.
Yeah, exactly. So Chris and I have been friends for a long time.
A very
long time, 50 years or so. We essentially met at the Long Beach Grand Prix in the mid-1970s. I know it's hard to believe that I'm that old that I would actually be there, but we met a long time ago, and we've raced cars our whole lives. We're race car driving instructors. We do all sorts of fun events for manufacturers. BMW is one of our favorite. We do lots of driving events for those guys. And we race cars. As I said, we won the U.S. Touring Car Championship last year.
Yeah, that was exciting.
It was. And we've bought and sold a lot of cars. We've traveled around the world going to car races. So, we have a lot of experience.
Yeah, we do. Some really good knowledge and some hard-learned knowledge. You know, there's a big difference between the two, and we'll get into that.
No question at all. So, but the Speed Traveler Roadshow, we talk about cars, of course, and we talk about interesting cars that you can go out there and buy. Usually we have a marquee brand, and last week it was I'm choking on
already
myself.
Joking.
So
usually
early.
you get about 25 minutes into the show before you start gagging on the water, but
so usually we have a marquee brand, and that last week was Ferrari. We've done ones on the Corvette, on the Porsche, and by
what
the
do
way,
we have in stock for today?
We're going to talk about movie cars.
Movie cars. I love it. Well, wealth of knowledge there.
Yeah, and I was going to quickly make the point, though, is if you are interested in buying a Corvette or a Porsche or a Ferrari, you can go to our YouTube channel, which is the Speed Traveler, and you could see all of the recordings that we've done, and you can get a lot of knowledge on that particular car. So if you're out there looking for a Lotus, we did one on Lotus, and we have a lot of firsthand knowledge on the Lotus brand. Go out there and check it out on our YouTube page.
And if you have any questions, message us, DM us on the social medias. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any reasonable questions, we will respond. If it's a stupid question, you'll probably get a frowny face response, but you will get a response. And I say frowny face as a polite version.
Yeah.
But movie cars, that's a fun topic. I love talking about movie cars.
It's funny because the marquee movie cars get top dollar. And the trick is you don't just buy a movie car that was used. I mean, we have lots of cars that were used in movies like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Bosch and things like that. But, those cars aren't really worth as much as the ones that the stars were actually sat in.
Right.
And those have a lot of value.
Right. Like we have a great Lotus that was used in a number of commercials, but it doesn't hold near the value as, say, the Ferrari 308 that Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. drove.
Actually sat in
and drove in the Cannonball Run.
Yeah, and you know what? We're gonna deep dive into that in our next segment on actual movie cars. But I thought first, let's talk about a little about what we got going for the show today. So we're going to talk, as we just mentioned, about movie cars. Then we're going to talk about if you're going to buy a movie car, what you should look for. Because as
now, when you say movie car, and I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but you mean like movie cars that were already in movies, or buying movie cars so that then have them used in movies?
Both. Yeah,
both. Okay.
I think you can either buy a car that's, if you've got the budget, and generally they're a good investment, because movie cars really go up, particularly some like the Paul Walker cars, that were from Fast and Furious. But it's a good investment. But also we're going to talk about buying some cars that you can use in movies yourself. Right. So if you find like a fun 80s car, we'll talk about that a little more. But you're going to have to hold out for that. You're going to have to wait till the next segment and the next two segments to hear more about that. And then at the end of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about Formula One. And you mentioned this morning that IndyCar is starting their championship this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend in St. Petersburg. So that's definitely going to be a segment.
Yeah, and the Formula One had their first race over the weekend at the Grand Prix of Bahrain. So lots to talk about there. But first,
spoiler alert: Max Verstappen won.
Yeah,
shocker.
But first, Chris, let's talk a little bit of automotive news. And we're not anti-electric car here on the Speed Traveler Roadshow. I think they have a place where, like Santa Monica is a good example, or where you live in Carlsbad. It's like small little downtown. It's very clean and a good place. If you don't drive a lot, it makes a lot of sense. But if you're in a big town, like if you have to drive from one side of Los Angeles to the other, and you have to drive from one side of Houston, which we had a lot of experience doing that.
Oh my goodness.
But it doesn't quite make as much sense. And I think
so. I'm gonna just push it out there, Charlie. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it really. I try not to be too aggressive about this.
Right.
But I really freaking hate these electric vehicle mandates that are being jammed down our throats. And that's really where I run into the problem. I don't really have a problem with battery-powered anything. I mean, my leaf blower, my power drill, the impact wrenches on our lug nuts on our race cars, they're all battery-powered. So a very effective use of battery technology. But in a car, look, I mean, I have to jump back to what Toyota says. They sold 11 million cars last year.
Right.
And of those 11 million cars globally, just barely over 100,000 of them were all electric vehicles.
Right.
And then two, Toyota has their 1-6-90 rule. And it's basically, it takes the same amount of material movement to produce one all-electric car as it does to produce 6 plug-in hybrids as it does to produce 90 hybrid vehicles.
Unbelievable.
So one car for all electric versus 90 cars
and somehow
for
it
hybrid
doesn't
technology.
seem like those equations are put into the process of mandating electric cars.
And how is that green? How is that green?
Yeah. And we've done
alternative,
shows. Right?
But it's not green.
And I think you're right. I think that's where people have a big issue is the mandates. I don't want the state of California telling me that I can only buy an electric car because, the combustion engine, as you just mentioned, is a great alternative.
Yeah.
Especially as they become more efficient, and it's funny that that's the alternative car.
That's the alternative.
The one that is probably better for the environment.
Right.
And I'm with you. Like if they have to force it down your throat, I don't think it's going to work anywhere. And I literally think it's like, back in the day when they came up with the steam engine car, and they were like, "This is gonna be the greatest thing ever."
The Stanley steamer.
Yeah, the steamer, and then the combustion engine came along, and the combustion engine was actually already there.
Right.
So the steamer came along as an alternative.
Right, because water and fire were more readily available than oil.
Yeah, and so, but. It went the way of the dodo bird because it just wasn't practical. And so I think it's the same thing now, except for even worse because they didn't mandate you had to use a steam engine car, in the 1910s.
No, do you figure it out.
Yeah, they didn't mandate it. If it was better, then people would naturally buy it.
Right.
If it was a legitimate progression forward, then they would buy it. And that's the thing. I don't see electric cars as a progression forward when you talk about the batteries coming from China, and they don't add into the equation the pollution of all the materials coming from Africa. They don't add into the equation the kids and kids that are 12 years old that are mining the cobalt in the Congo.
Right.
They don't none of that's put into the equation. So I'm with you. I think that the electric car, I really think it's going to die out. I don't think it's going to.
I agree. We were talking a little bit before the show about Ford and what they're doing and how they're diminishing, they're cutting their manufacturing.
F-150 Lightning.
Which, the number one selling vehicle in the world has been the Ford F-150 truck for forever. Yeah. And to think that would be a good platform to maybe add an electric vehicle motor to that car would make a lot of sense because they're already producing, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these, and they're saying, this isn't really working out.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think that's, Toyota, you brought up Toyota, that's a great example. It's the number one automaker in the world. And if the number one automaker in the world is like, I think there's things that we can do better and we shouldn't go all electric. I mean, then that's saying something.
And that's just from the vehicle manufacturing side of things. Yeah. This is not even addressing the infrastructure that has to go into. Like you mentioned, it's a lot easier to get around town in Santa Monica. Right. But that's because charging centers are all over the place in that community. And you mentioned Carlsbad, and quite frankly, it's not that easy because there aren't any established charging units. Your charging unit is your home. Yeah, exactly. And you have to go on solar, and you have to do these. I mean, otherwise it just gets incredibly expensive. Yeah. So it's just like, meh.
No. It makes a lot of sense that we were going to do a tour for I won't even mention who it is. Yeah. But they're having some troubles. Right. It's electric car brand, and we had to plan out our route, and we weren't allowed to ship the cars. We had to drive them. And I think it was Atlanta to New Orleans or somewhere. It was a long route. And there was nowhere to stop in between.
Nowhere to stop. Again, the infrastructure part of this thing.
And so we wouldn't have been able to make that. We had to ship from Atlanta to New Orleans because there was a couple little towns, but we would have had to use 110.
Well, we literally planned on having a support truck with a generator in the truck so that we could charge it in a worst case emergency situation or overnight at a hotel room.
Yeah, and that's the only way it was going to work. So, I think Toyota's got it right. And I think Toyota's got it right. They're focusing on hybrids. They're focusing on their non-plug-in hybrids, which is interesting. And I didn't realize until you mentioned that quote how efficient they were. You could build 90 non-plug-in hybrids for the same material of one all-electric car. That's crazy.
That is absolutely insane.
All right, well, we're going to take our first break, but we're going to be right back. We're going to talk about movie cars and how you can own your own movie car.
And before we even jump into that, has there ever been an electric car that has been featured in a movie?
That's a good point.
That's a good question. I think we're going to Google that right now. When we come back, we might have an answer.
All right, sounds good. This is the Speed Traveler Roadshow. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Speed Traveler Roadshow. I'm Chris Evertsen. That's Charlie Frank. You're listening to us live on KHTS AM 1220 FM 98.1. Of course, we're available wherever you download your favorite podcast. Of course, check us out on the interwebs at The Speed Traveler. That's our websites, our YouTubes, our social medias. It's all at The Speed Traveler. And of course, if you like what we're doing, hit that like button, hit that follow button, and send us your messages. And Charlie, before the break, we mentioned that we're going to talk about movie cars, and we were talking about electric cars. We asked if any electric vehicles were featured in a movie. And we actually found some interesting stuff.
Yeah, we did. Well, the first and foremost is the Barbie Corvette.
I love it.
Margot Robbie drove in the movie Barbie from 2023. They actually filmed that movie at Warner Brothers, not Warner Brothers here, but Warner Brothers in the UK. And they built those incredible, elaborate sets. So obviously they couldn't have a combustion engine inside a sound stage with closed doors. So they made that Corvette. It's obviously not a real Corvette. It was just made out of an electric. It was basically made out of a golf cart.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
And so I guess that is a electric car that was featured in a movie. But
okay.
Also the Chevy Blazer SS EV, if you've seen the movie, was like the getaway car when Will Ferrell and the bad guys from Mattel were chasing Barbie. And that car was the Chevy Blazer SS EV. So that was also an all-electric car.
Oh, that's great. Well, there also were some make-believe electric cars that were in movies, like the film Gattaca. Who was that? Ethan Hawke? Uma Thurman, maybe?
Right.
And a couple others. So it's not like they haven't been seen in movies.
Right. Yeah.
But they certainly haven't. I mean, in this era, Barbie's about it.
Yeah. And what's funny is obviously GM had a deal because we're talking about the Chevy Blazer SS and Barbie. Right. They also, Ken's car was the all-electric Hummer.
Oh, really?
with flames painted on it.
That's fantastic. fantastic.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the movie, and I feel like I'm missing out here. I'm not a part of the subculture of the Barbie world.
Right.
So
yeah.
I got to see that movie.
But
that's kind of cool.
It was cool. And we are covering the subject of movie cars. And it's interesting that those cars were featured. I hadn't really thought about the Barbie movie cars, but it's funny you brought it up. But lots of other famous movie cars. And not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the new ones, but we could talk about the old ones too. And the first one I wanted to bring up was the 1966 Cadillac DeVille from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a huge car.
Yeah,
I mean, what is it, like 27 feet long?
Yeah, exactly.
And what a great car. Big V8 engine in there. And wow, that was a really cool one.
Yeah, and I think that the more history about that car, after the movie, about a year later, they sold it at a place called Prop Store. So if you're in the market for a movie car, go check out Prop Store. Most of the time it's like, the headpiece that, I don't know, the headpiece that Tom Cruise wore in something or whatever. Right. But every once in a while they'll have cars. They sold all the mock-up Formula One cars from the movie Rush.
That's so cool.
With Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
And what a great movie. And that was made by Ron Howard, who's a huge Formula One fan.
But those were cars that were specifically made for the movie.
They were.
Which is kind of its own category.
Yeah, no, that is.
The Cadillac from the 66 Cadillac from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that's a car that actually exists.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cars that are real cars that became prominent players in movies. You mentioned Paul Walker and the Fast and Furious cars.
For sure. But getting back real quick before we move on from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So that they made two of those cars. They put in new Chevy GM motors, because you can't have a car that's featured in the movie. They can't rely on a 66 car. So they had to put, which normally the speed travelers don't suggest you modify your classic car at all.
But this is a unique environment. This is a working car.
It's a working car.
This is not a fun car, project car. This needs to be, this car cannot catch a cold and call in sick for the day.
Because when you're paying Brad Pitt and those guys $20 million to make a movie, they can't be waiting for the car.
Right.
So they had two of these cars. They put GM crate motors in them. They changed the running gear, but what I was getting at is they sold very inexpensively. If you've seen the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Cadillac's in the movie a lot, and it's generally being driven by Brad Pitt.
Right.
And so they both were in the car a lot, and the car, there was two of them. But one of them sold for about $55,000. I mean, that's a relative bargain in the movie world,
especially. When you consider it's a well-sorted car. Granted it's been modified with the motor to be, and the brakes to be, if safe and efficient and reliable.
Yeah.
But now it's got this movie history and this movie heritage.
And incredible stars. So if you're in the market for that, we would definitely say look for cars that have been featured heavily in the movie. Like if it's just in one scene, it's not going to have the value of, let's say, the Cadillac. But that was keep your eye out on the Prop Store, and because that's a great place to buy those cars. They also, before we get off the subject of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they had the Carmen Ghia, right?
Yeah,
which
had a Subaru engine.
Yeah, had the Subaru engine to make it more reliable, and that car was only anticipated it would get about 35,000. It got over 50.
Really?
Yeah, it did. And so there again. Don't buy classic cars and modify them, or generally don't buy a modified classic car unless Brad Pitt or someone like that had driven.
Right.
And so those were two real bargains.
Yeah, and these are real cars. And we mentioned some Barbie, the Corvette in the Barbie movie that was manufactured for that vehicle. Right. There's also a lot, again, to these vehicles that were specially manufactured for movies. Yeah. There's a number of them out there, and a great place to see a lot of those cars is at the Peterson Automotive Museum here locally in Los Angeles.
That's a great point.
One of my all-time favorite car movies ever. You know what I'm going to say. Yeah. It's the Great Race from 1966.
Yeah.
And the Hannibal Twin 8 is at the Peterson Automotive Museum. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know where the Leslie Special is.
Right. That's a good question.
And that's a good question, but you can see some of these special-made movie cars at places like the Peterson Automotive Museum. They have some sci-fi cars and trucks that were in movies from the 70s and 80s and every generation.
Yeah, that's cool. They have the Starsky and Hutch car.
Starsky and Hutch car.
Yeah.
They recently had a lot of cars on display from all the James Bond movies.
Right.
And some unique ones, like the Mustang.
Yeah.
From Diamonds Are Forever that he raced around downtown Las Vegas.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. So no, that's a good point. Peterson Auto Museum has great movie cars. If anything else, it'll get you inspired, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I agree, that's one of the best ones. One of the lesser known, but still obviously important in our lives was the Cannonball Run Lamborghini Countach.
Oh yeah,
And I've got an interesting story about that. It was originally owned by a guy named Terry Bernius, I think it is, and he was buddies with Brock Yates. Brock Yates was like the writer of the Cannonball Run, and those guys.
Well, he was the innovator of the event itself.
The event, that went from sea to shining sea.
Yeah,
I think they went from the Red Ball Garage in New York to
the Queen Mary.
Oh, to the Portofino Inn in Redondo Beach.
Oh,
but in the movie, they changed it to the Queen Mary.
That's right.
But so that was a great seat. They still do the race. It isn't quite the same as it used to be because it's gained so much fame that now they have to respect the speed limits and they go to racetracks and do like special events. But Brock Yates borrowed this Lamborghini Countach. It's a '79 Countach, and it was in the whole starting sequence of the movie. And people just loved it with the sound of the motors. So Ron Rice, who was the owner of Hawaiian Tropic, actually bought the car.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Paid a fortune for it. And then it sat around and waited about 20 years. And then he changed the interior. And then luckily a guy came along that knew the car and knew the movie, kind of like us.
Right.
Loved the movie with Burt Reynolds. I think it was from, 1981? And his name's Jeff Ippolito. And he found it. He bought it. And he put the original interior back in and made it exactly like it was in the...
That's so cool. It's funny you mentioned Hawaiian Tropic because Cannonball Run again.
Yeah.
There was the NASCAR, the Hawaiian Tropic Chevelle in the Cannonball Run as well. Who drove that? It was Terry
Bradshaw and
Gary Ducey?
Mel Tillis.
Oh, Mel Tillis.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And so that was that one sold not that long ago. I kicked myself about 10 years ago.
Yeah, we were looking at that. I remember that.
It was on I don't remember which live auction it was at, and it sold for I think it was about $36,000. And it was actually had been owned by Burt Reynolds.
That's so cool.
It was right before Burt Reynolds' death. So that car would never sell for that now. It's only going to go for more than that. But But and Burt Reynolds, we hadn't talked about the 77 Pontiac Trans Am.
How do you not talk how do you talk movie cars and not talk about the Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am?
Yeah, exactly. It's so true. We have a little bit of interesting history on the Smokey and the Bandit car, and that is that Pontiac gave Hal Needham, who was the director and Paul Newman's stuntman back in the day, but turned director. Pontiac gave them 4 Trans Ams, but they were 76 Trans Ams that still had the round headlights. And the movie was going to come out in 77, and so they were worried that they wouldn't want a year-old car, so they somehow fabricated the new design for the front of those cars. And the production company had to swap out the front to put the square headlamps on, so they look like.
I did not know that. That is a bit of.
So if you find one of those cars, they're actually 76 Trans Ams that are made to look like 77s.
That is totally cool.
And I've seen them many times erroneously listed on auction sites as 77 Pontiac Trans Ams.
Oh, so it's not the real deal.
Or they're just not hip to what happened.
If it is the real deal and they don't know what they have.
Right.
And if it's not, that's another thing. You got to check the tag. So here's an important thing: do your research. Like there's a little tidbit, Charlie, that I did not know.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of information that really separates the good purchase and the good buyer from a bad purchase and a bad buy.
Yeah, agreed. And on that pleasant note. I sound like Top Gear all of a sudden.
I know.
But we're going to take
that bombshell.
On that bombshell, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about buying some movie cars. This is the Speed Traveler Roadshow on KHTS Radio.
All right, well, welcome back to the Speed Traveler Road Show. You're listening to us live, KHTS AM 1220 FM 98.1. Also available wherever you download your favorite podcasts and all over the interwebs at thespeedtraveler.com. And all of our social media is The Speed Traveler. And Charlie, we're going to kind of continue our topic of conversation with movie cars.
Right. You know what? And we've had a lot of movie cars. We used... I wanted to bring up, we have a green Volkswagen Bug, and we paid $3,000 for it, and we ended up making almost $9,000 renting it to Quentin Tarantino for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So that's got to be near the top of most profitable cars we've ever owned.
Yeah, percentage-wise, three times investment.
Value.
Is pretty good.
Yeah, and it's sitting at your house now, right?
It is, and it's actually it just drove around the block.
Oh, perfect!
The other day. So you got to use your car. So if you store your vehicles, here's an important thing: 2 things. Disconnect your battery. And when you disconnect your battery, it's very important that you disconnect it by the negative tower.
Okay.
Always by the negative tower. 2, move it around periodically because nothing rots faster than something that is unused.
Yeah.
This is especially true with all the rubber components on your car.
So true. That's good advice. But diving deep into the subject of buying a movie car. So yeah, I mean you can buy your own movie cars. And
when you say buying your own movie car, we're talking about buying a car that you can use as a daily driver, but then also rent back to the movie or production industry.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we've had a lot of cars in commercial shoots, movie shoots.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about cars right now, that's really what we're talking about is cars that you can use as a daily, but also rent back to the movie.
If it's something you really like you like Volkswagen Rabbits, and 80s movies and TV shows are super hot right now. So if you find yourself a good Volkswagen Rabbit or maybe one of the GTI?
The GTI?
Yeah, that's a great car because you should be able to use that in movies. You could buy it for what, 10, 15 grand? Well, probably 15 for that car.
Yeah.
But even a regular VW Rabbit.
A regular Rabbit or a cabriolet.
Oh, yeah.
You know, with the 80s being, that's going to be, you know, the iconic yuppie mobile.
Yeah. So you can make your own movie car in a sense. Now, the thing is, those cars don't necessarily have a lot of value. Like we have, as we mentioned, we have a 1971 VW Beetle. And we're giving away a little secret here because the movie was supposed to be set in 1969, but we changed the taillights.
Yes.
And that was the only difference, was the taillights. So we changed the taillights in that car. So I don't know if that car has a lot more value than, because it was in the movie.
I don't know that it does or does not, but it's interesting. What I really loved about that, what you just said about changing the taillights, is that's how focused on the details Quentin Tarantino is with his movies.
For sure.
It's like, these are not the right, literally tells us these are not the right taillights.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
Go change it. And by the way, it's the same model, it's basically the same model Bug that was passed, I think it's 12 times in one of the greatest car chases of all time.
It would be great if it was the actual car.
Oh my God. And the movie we're talking about is Bullet with Steve McQueen. And if you watch that iconic car chase in the streets of San Francisco and the surrounding area, there's a green Beetle that gets passed, I think it's 12 times in that chase.
Yeah, because in those days, Quentin Tarantino had the budget to go rent 180 period correct cars.
Right.
They didn't really think about that back in 1971. I'm looking right now what year the movie came out. So you're right. They used the same car. They used the same car over and over as the background cars. So Chris is right. It gets passed numerous times, right? It looks like 1968.
Oh, 68. Okay.
Yeah. So, so you could buy your own car to use in the movies, and we've done a lot of that, and we generally make good money. The Lotus Esprit has been a great one because it's got a unique look, and it wasn't that expensive of a car.
No.
And we've been paid really well for that car. So.
Right. And the thing is even these period correct movies and everything, everyone's looking for those idiosyncrasies, the incorrect dates, and as an example, a great one is Kirk Douglas in not Hercules. What was the movie?
Yeah. So, Ten Commandments?
No, not Gladiator. But he's wearing a fancy new watch, which obviously was not available in Roman times.
Yeah. Well, the detail wasn't quite as good back in the day.
But today, like if you have a mid '80s anything, it's a period correct car that would work. A mid '80s Mercedes. Now it's something you can use. Like you can find them fairly cheap. $4,000 or $5,000. Make sure you spend $2,000, $3,000 on it, making sure it's working well.
Right.
But you can rent that back to the movie industry.
Like $350, $400 a day.
Yeah. So it's as a struggling actor in the neighborhood, it's a great way to augment your day's income by not only just being a background actor or even a primary actor. Well, not primary, but primary actor in the sense of in the front of the scene. Right. If you have a car that you can drive in that movie as well, you can bill for both those things. Yeah. So now your day is a $700 day.
No, it's a really good point, and especially with the basic background, the person that doesn't even have it is not part of the union. I think it's only like $120 a day. Oh. So if you add in a car for $350, that makes your day not bad. I mean, that's an excellent $470 day, where you would have got $120.
And all you're hoping for is exposure.
And if you are an aspiring actor, what's great about it is when you have a car involved, you will interact with the director, like we did with Quentin Tarantino.
Yes.
Like he wanted to talk to us and tell us what to do and tell us where to move the car. And as a regular $120 a day background person, you don't get that opportunity.
No, you're being paid to get that introduction.
Yeah, exactly.
Not paid much, but you're getting paid to get that introduction, which you wouldn't otherwise have gotten. Yeah. It's a huge way to move forward in the industry.
Yeah. You know what? And we were talking about movie cars, and I just want to go back real quick to some of the cars
Did I tangent off into a random direction?
No. I think that was a very viable and good subject on telling people how to and you could use your own car almost anywhere in the country. Yeah. Because production's moved all over the country now.
It has.
It used to just be in California, but now it's everywhere. So go to Drive Vinti. They're not paying us, but that's a great place to put your car.
It's a good thing to bring that up, because where do you list your car to rent it for the movie industry? So Vinti is a great place to start.
Drive Vinti is a great place. But getting back real quick to we were talking about the 77 Pontiac Trans Am, which is technically a 76 Pontiac Trans Am. And one of those sold a couple years ago at auction for $495,000.
Are you kidding me?
So one of those 4 cars sold for just under $500,000. And honestly, it's a relative bargain. Now that Burt Reynolds has passed on, it's probably just going to go up. So, but really interesting. We talked also about the cars from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Those sold for about $50,000. There was the 66 Cadillac DeVille, and there was the Carmen Ghia. And those both sold at auction. Those were modified to work better in the movie, and they sold, and $50,000 is a good deal for an absolute A-list movie with A-list actors in the car.
Oh yeah. That's only going to go up in value, and at some point it will end up in the Peterson Automotive Museum.
Exactly. But one other one that I thought was interesting is there's a car, as you mentioned, the Paul Walker cars are all gone crazy. The cars that he drove, because of course he's passed on now. Right. So there's additional value there. But there was a Pontiac Fiero that they converted to a 65 Ford GT40.
So great.
And apparently I haven't personally seen the car, but a buddy of mine saw it, and he said it was really done well.
Really?
And that sold recently for $110,000. So that was a relative bargain, because that's a car that Paul Walker was in, and so it's a weird. It's not a Ford GT, but there's no way they're going to take a $2 million car and run it through a brick wall.
Right, right.
So, but yeah,
that's a budget that I don't think we ever want to see.
Yeah, exactly. If they're taking priceless cars and that was frightening. If they're taking priceless cars and running them through walls, that we don't ever want to see that in the movie industry. But All right, we are going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk Formula One news. That segment went by fast, didn't it?
It sure did.
But we're going to come back and talk about Formula One and IndyCar, and this is the Speed Traveler Roadshow on KHTS Radio.
Welcome back to the Speed Traveler Roadshow. I'm Chris Evertsen. That's Charlie Frank. And in this segment, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive, I guess the shallow end dive into open wheel motorsports. We have news from Formula One and IndyCar.
Yeah.
We just had the first race this past weekend in Formula One, and shocker, spoiler alert, Max Verstappen walked away with it. But
he really did. I mean, I think he beat his teammate by 20 seconds, but apparently he had a lot left, if he had wanted to go faster.
Yeah.
I think that at some point they were like, before the race, because they wouldn't have transmitted this over the radio, but before the race, I'm sure they would have said, okay, if you've got 15 seconds on everybody, you can take it a little easy.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what happened.
Well, coded radio messages, stat 5. We need to go stat 5.
That's true. Stat 5 means slow down a little bit.
Slow the heck down.
Yeah.
Aside from Max Verstappen walking away with it, what was your takeaway from the race this past weekend?
You know what? I have a few takeaways. And by the way, we do a new Speed Traveler deep dive on Formula One. You can find
a dedicated show.
Dedicated show on Formula One, because we had a lot of people asking us about doing more of a deep dive and getting more into F1.
That's how we got the name.
Yeah. So
we're not that creative.
Yeah. So you can check it out you can find it on YouTube, and you can also find it wherever you get your podcasts. And so, we'll do a deep dive. We're going to talk on the deep dive show. Particularly, we're going to talk about the race before and then preview the upcoming race. So without giving everything away on that, which I'm going to talk about a little later today when we record the deep dive. But my takeaways were, I can't believe, I thought the other teams would be closer to Max Verstappen than they were. And I was shocked that he just basically walked away with it again.
Again, yeah. And with absolute ease. I mean, it was a second and a half gap to P2 by the end of the very first lap.
Yeah, exactly.
No chance.
Yeah,
no chance for the Ferraris or anyone else to compete with that.
Yeah, I was happy. I was pleased to see Ferrari. They came in third with Carlos Sainz. But I was pleased to see Ferrari do well, because they're probably going to be the ones that are going to give Red Bull a run for their money. It doesn't look like the Mercedes certainly at this track wasn't too quick, was it?
No, George Russell drove the wheels off that Mercedes, but
did.
I would agree with you. Ferrari is the best of the rest.
Yeah.
That's not saying much, though, because they definitely had their struggles. I still think Ferrari's the closest to Red Bull, but I still think they're going backwards to the other competition. They just happen to be the ones are closest to the Red Bull freight train that is just going to dominate F1 this entire season.
It certainly looks like it, doesn't it?
I hate to be. It kind of. It ruins the racing and makes you just say, "Let's just watch this."
Ruins our show.
Ruins our show. But there's so much news in the middle of the pack. Winners and losers for me. Winner of the race, Carlos Sainz, with that brilliant drive, that brilliant pass on his teammate. What was that, lap 17?
Right.
Clearly the best of the rest. Carlos Sainz is driving like a man with a mission, and he has a mission. So definitely a winner there. He accomplished his goal.
And his mission is he's out of a contract at the end of this year. So he's driving for his future.
Yes.
Yeah.
So definitely a winner. Another winner for me, and this is going back to Q2, and that is Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas.
Yeah.
Driving that thing into P6 in Q2, ultimately getting into the top 10 for qualifying. Right. But that was the lap of the weekend for me.
Yeah.
The Haas went backwards after that in the race.
It's a shame, because you're dead on right, and the Haas is the only American company that owns a Formula One team at this point. And Hülkenberg just destroys it in qualifying in a good way. And you're right. That's the lap of the weekend. He was at the top of the chart for half the session.
Right.
And he's in a car that, his funding is probably 15% of what the other teams are, Mercedes and Ferrari, are spending.
Absolutely. And other winners for you? I have one more winner on the weekend for me. And for me, actually, that is drive of the day in the race.
Right.
And I'm going to get squawk about this. I know it, because everyone's going, it's Carlos Sainz. Well, yes, he performed, I think, ultimately the best. But for me, the drive of the day really goes to Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin.
Right.
You know, he qualified in the top 10, or excuse me, P11.
Right.
In lap 1, had a little bit of an altercation with Nico Hulkenberg, the Hulk. The Hulk smash, and went to the back of the pack, and then drove that Aston Martin from last on track to ninth place, real ninth place. Now they did a driver swap. Alonso and Stroll switched at the end.
Right.
So Alonso was ninth and Stroll was 10th. But really, for me, that was the drive of the race.
Yeah. It's interesting because you have one of the best drives of the race, and you also have one of the storylines of underwhelming, and that was the Aston Martin car in general. Last year, Fernando Alonso was competing or was on the podium and was right at the front of the pack.
Right.
And they just weren't really anywhere close on this race.
Not even close.
Yeah, it's really disappointing because everyone had high hopes for Aston Martin. The owner of the team is Lawrence Stroll. He had predicted that they would get wins, and you know, he's going for a championship. But you know, the championship's 100% out. Maybe they'll get a win somewhere where, you know, the car is less important, like Monaco.
Right.
But that was disappointing, wasn't it?
That was very disappointing. So that, I mean, they were a loser as a team in that capacity for me.
Yeah.
You know, along with a couple others.
And before we run out of time, what do you say for big winner for the weekend?
Carlos Sainz.
Carlos Sainz for Ferrari.
Yeah, Ferrari. I mean, that was he accomplished what he needed to do. He established his dominance on the Ferrari team. He outdrove Leclerc, even though Leclerc was complaining of issues.
Right.
When those issues seemed to be resolved, he did nothing to improve his pace towards Carlos Sainz. I see that as just going to be I think a continuation into the next race this coming weekend.
Yeah, and for me, big winner. I mean, as much as I hate to admit it, I think it's Red Bull, and I didn't think Max and Red Bull would be as dominant, but they were.
I think they knew it going in. Yeah. I think they sandbagged the whole time.
Yes.
The whole time.
All right, big loser for the weekend?
Big loser. There's a number of them. I mean, again, Aston Martin's right there. A couple other teams kind of went backwards. I have to say Alpine is probably in a world of hurt. I expect them to push a little bit forward, and they went backwards.
Yeah, and you know what? That's also my big loser for the weekend.
Really?
It is. And so I'm glad you brought it up because we can both talk about it. If you don't know the French team, Alpine, which was at one point the Renault team, they had an American, Omar, and we always mess up his last name, but it's Snaffauer. Omar Snaffauer was the team principal for Alpine, and he was slowly bringing them forward. Their two drivers, Ocon and Gasly, were in the mix at the start of last year.
Yes.
And for some reason, they fired Omar halfway through the season last year, sent him on his way, and they've just gone backwards.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a terrible fire.
Yeah.
You know, because if you don't know his past, and he's American, which is interesting, there's hardly any Americans in the, in the F1
and they're doing what
world.
they can to keep Americans out of F1.
Yeah, they are. But he's American team principal, and he did a brilliant job back when they won the race. It was at Bahrain. It was with Perez. It was the BHW team, which was the
Pink Panther.
Yeah.
the Racing Panthers.
Yeah. So they've done a great job. It was the former Force India team, which became the team that I remember now.
I'm struggling with this year's teams.
I know.
I mean, it's RB2 for any of you that ask in the future. You know, the Visa Cash App is RB2.
Yep.
I know we're running a little bit out of time on F1.
IndyCar.
Do you want to jump into IndyCar? Because the season opener is this weekend in St. Petersburg. It's been the opening race for IndyCar for many, many years, and it's an exciting street course. I mean, last year the season opener saw a great battle between Roman Grosjean and McLaughlin.
Right.
Roman Grosjean, who was on the Andretti team, and McLaughlin, who was on the Penske team.
Right.
McLaughlin's still with Penske. Roman Grosjean has moved on to the Juncos team.
Right.
And it was a great battle until they crashed out. But there was great battles through that whole field. So I expect to see more of that again this year in the opener for St. Pete's. And We should talk a little bit. What?
Oh, I was just going to say
what?
that. I was going to say, you talked about the opener for IndyCar, and it reminded me that we're going to have Jim McElligott, who's the CEO of the Long Beach Grand Prix. He's going to be on with us next week.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a great time to tease it. I'm glad you brought up IndyCar. McElligott's been with the event since its inception.
Yeah.
In 1975. So he's going to join us next week.
That'll be exciting.
Yeah.
And I guess back to this current year with IndyCar, with our there's been a couple driver swaps. Andretti Global, who has a great IndyCar team, trying to make their way into Formula One. I think they are a team. They have everything to drive for this year.
Right.
They have to win the championship this year with one of their drivers.
Yeah. And you know what? It's a great tease for next week. You're going to have to tune in next week to listen to all of our IndyCar preview. We're also going to have the CEO of the Long Beach Grand Prix on, which is IndyCar's big race, the crown jewel at Long Beach. Join us next week. We'll talk about IndyCar. We'll talk about Formula One. This is the Speed Traveler Roadshow on KHTS Radio. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week.